So this here I wanted to start with is actually my drugstore section. These are some of the Wet n Wild eyeshadow palettes. I think they're really great drugstore eyeshadow palettes. I just feel like I don't dive into many of them very often. And if we're being honest, I haven't touched these in a while, and some of these haven't even been opened. So we're gonna go ahead and just pass them along. Next up are these newer ones. These are Pixie by Petra. I actually just recently got these. This one I've played with more than the other, but being that my collection's so big, I feel like they kind of got missed in the process of me playing around with them more and more. So I'm gonna go ahead and hold on to them. This one here is the Milani Most Love Mattes. Another one that I just recently got in my collection just a few months ago. I actually really do like this one. I think it has a really great formula. I find all the colors to be perfect for everyday wear. Even though this palette's been around for quite some time, I actually just got this in my collection. I found this in clearance at Target, so I was really excited about that. So I'm gonna hold on to this. Some more eyeshadow palettes from Milani. These were actually not my favorite. I did do a first impressions using this, and I just felt like the quality in these were definitely not like some of the other quality from Milani that I have experienced. So I'm going to go ahead and declutter these. These are the full spectrum eyeshadow palettes. I got this sent a while ago in a PR kit. They don't get used in my collection very much, so if we're being honest with ourselves, I'm just going to declutter this. These are by e.l.f. This one here is the Mad for Matte palette, and this one here is the Rose Gold palette. I think I'm going to hold on to, not this one, but I think I'm going to hold on to this palette. I don't have a lot of e.l.f. eyeshadow palettes that you'll notice in my collection, and I really want to get some of the bigger ones, but I do find myself using this one way more. This one was actually one that I picked up from the Dollar Drugstore. I think Dollar Tree picked it up because I was doing like a drugstore eyeshadow palette thing. It did its job and its purpose. I've never reached for it since then, so that is getting decluttered. This one here is by Colourpop. I just have so many of these tones already, and I prefer them in other palettes. But the formula is decent. I just do not dive into this because, again, I just have other palettes that I prefer. Another one by Catrice. This is the Catrice Nude Essentials. I do like this palette for the lighter shades. The biggest problem that I feel like I've had with this palette when I've played around with it is that it's not dark enough for me, and the shadows just don't ever get as deep as I would prefer. So I'm gonna pass this along. I love this palette. This is part of the Wet n Wild Mega, I believe this was like their Crystal Cavern collection. And this here is by far my favorite shade. I use this so much for highlighting the inner corners. I'm gonna hold on to this one. So this was part of my last declutter. I remember decluttering quite a few of these eyeshadow palettes, but I wanted to hold on to this one. I did play around with it a few more times, but really I kept it for this green shadow here. And while I do like the green shadow, I find that these two matte formulas just are a little subpar. I have this green shadow in other palettes, so I'm just gonna declutter it. So this one here is one of the bite-sized eyeshadow palettes from e.l.f. I really do like this one, so I'm going to hold on to it. This is the LA Girl eyeshadow palette. I picked this up last Christmas. Some of the colors are okay. Some of these colors just, they could do better. But again, just really isn't something that I think I will miss if I don't have it in my collection. So I'm going to pass that along. So this one here is by Charity Cosmetics. This is their matte palette. A really nice palette. I think it has a really great assortment of more colorful shadows than anything. But I do find this palette to have really good pigment. I've actually seen this brand at CVS now. They do sell it there. And I think I'm going to hold on to it because I do dive into it. So all of these right here are by Profusion. And we definitely need a declutter because I have 5 of them, and I don't think I use more than 1 or 2. The Sienna's palette by Profusion is my favorite one of all the ones that they have made. This is the one that I dive into the most, so my plan is to hold on to this one. Another one that they have that's a really good one as well is the Mattes palette. I do have some of these colors already in the Sienna's palette, so I'm going to go ahead and pass this along. This one here is the Profusion Sapphires. This was one of the eyeshadow palettes that I said I was going to hold on to because in my last declutter I never played with it. I still haven't touched it, so that obviously tells you right there. I'm going to pass this along. This one here is the Amber Eyes eyeshadow makeup case. I find the formula in this one to be a little bit subpar in comparison to the Sienna's palette. Plus, I'm not a very big fan of its packaging. I prefer the other size palettes, so I'm gonna pass this along. And then the last one I have is the Pro Pigment palette. I really do like this palette. I think that the more pigmented shadows do really perform very well. I just don't feel like I use this very much. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to hold on to it because I think I have other palettes that have similar colors to this. So I think I'm going to pass this along. Two are the Revolution Pro palettes. I find that this palette just looks really fun to play around with. So I'm going to hold on to these two. I do want to grab this one back here, which is a really big, bulky palette. But this is their Wet n Wild. This was like their 40th collection or 40th year or something like that. It was one of those big palettes that came out. I really like the eyeshadows in this palette. I find them to be very good, and I actually do dive into this palette. The quality is there. I think that the formula is there. Because I decluttered quite a few of the other ones, I think I'm going to hold on to this one. Also, this one was a part of their collection that came with that one. This one I actually think I'm going to declutter. While I do think it's a pretty palette and stuff, I feel like a lot of these colors you can find in the other palette. Maybe somebody else would enjoy it. This is Pixie's Pixie's bigger palette. I do like this larger pan size as well. I do like the different shades and variations that it offers. So I'm going to hold on to this one. Next up we have is the Bretman Rock and Wet n Wild collection. This collection was one of the cutest collections that I had. I really enjoyed a lot of the colors that he came out with. I loved this collection so much. I thought he did such a great job with it, and I really enjoyed this palette. And I do like having color in my collection in case I want to do something colorful, so I'm going to hold on to this. Since I do have that Bretman Rock palette and then I have that Wet n Wild, I'm going to go ahead and declutter this one. This was the Pac-Man and Wet n Wild collection they came out with. The eyeshadows in here were very pigmented and they worked, but I already have two other palettes that have colors that are very similar to this, so it's not really needed. Alright, so we have this one here by Pop Beauty. This is their Dusk Deluxe palette. I liked these more marbling effects shadows. While they aren't the greatest formula, they did apply okay. I have some of these shadows that I feel like are very similar to the ones that I'm going to keep from the other palettes from Revolution, so I'm going to pass this along. So this is the Ruby May Brights palette, which I believe we got in our Ipsy bag one time, and I played with it. I don't even think I've ever touched this actually if I'm looking at this. I don't know. I feel like I need to hold on to this. There's something about this colorful palette that just is really tearing me apart to let it go. This is hard. I think I'm going to hold on to this. I don't know why this isn't in here. I really wouldn't consider this to be the drugstore section, but this is the Meet Matchmaker. I got rid of so many of my Balm palettes from my last declutter, and I was really sad about it, but I had to. And I held on to this one because I thought that I would use this a lot more now that I didn't have my other ones, and I haven't. The biggest issue that I have with this eyeshadow palette is that the pan sizes are really tiny, and I have a tendency of getting some of the overlapping from the other eyeshadows, and it sometimes just makes my eyeshadow look a little wonky. So I really wish that they just would have done the 6 shadows and just did a full-size pan like they do with the other ones. I think that would have just been so much easier to work with, but I never really reach for this anymore, so I'm going to declutter this. So that was a successful dive. Now we're moving into more of my higher end eyeshadow palettes. I have the Urban Decay Electric palette. I got this during one of the Sephora sales, and I thought I was going to use it, and I really just don't ever touch it. I'll be honest, I don't touch it. I don't know why I'm saying hardly, because I really don't. I touched it maybe once or twice, and since then I haven't played with it, and it just needs to go. This one here is the Colourpop Wild Nothings palette. I like to keep mine in their boxes for some reason. I find it to look a little bit prettier. My biggest problem with this palette was just that it was way too light for me. It created some really soft and pretty looks, but nothing that I was super blown by. I'm just going to go ahead and declutter this because of all the eyeshadow palettes I have from Colourpop. This is probably one of my least favorite ones, so yeah. These are some of the Snap Shadows by Fenty. I do only have the newer ones. I already know I'm going to hold on to these. I have number 9, which I did do a look using. I love these eyeshadow palettes. I have this one, and then I also have number 10. And then I have the one that came out in the holiday collection. These are such beautiful eyeshadows, and I really want to add more to my collection. So definitely holding on to these. This here is my Jaclyn Hill palette. I'm definitely going to hold on to this palette. I still use it. You can see it's very well loved. I use it quite often. Next up I have is the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. I've seen this go on sale so many times, and if you still don't have this in your collection, I highly recommend getting it. I will say, of all the eyeshadow palettes that Urban Decay has came out with, this is probably my favorite one. I really want them to come out with like a #2 version of this, and so I'm really hoping that they will, but yes, definitely not getting rid of this. Next up is the Too Faced Gingerbread Spice palette. I actually almost decluttered this palette in my last declutter, but I decided to hold on to it. And then I pulled it in for a monthly recap in my monthly basket, and I fell in love with it again. And since then, I've actually dived into this quite a few times. So I'm going to hold on to this palette. It still is a really pretty palette to work with, and I'm really glad I didn't declutter this. This was supposed to be part of my drugstore section, but it got lost in the shuffle. And this is the Nudes of New York Maybelline palette. This is probably my favorite palette from Maybelline. If you're looking for a really good eyeshadow palette from the drugstore, this is definitely one to keep an eye out for. So we have a few Natasha Denona palettes. I can tell you right now, I'm not getting rid of them. I really do like them. I use them every day. This one here is the Natasha Denona Mini Lila palette. This was my very first one I picked up from her, and I really love it, so definitely not getting rid of it. The other one I have is one of the newer ones that came in our BoxyCharm. This is the Peak palette. I believe this was an exclusive to BoxyCharm. This is the Natasha Denona Safari palette. It took me a very long time to finally purchase one of these palettes, and I actually got this one when she did her sale and clearanced it out, and it was half price. I got this for $64. I love a really good all matte eyeshadow palette. This is a reoccurring palette that goes into my monthly basket. I would say that I would pay full price for this eyeshadow palette now that I have it. This here is the Natasha Denona Love palette. Again, another palette that I do use, but not often. I want to hold on to it because I want to play around with it more and really give it a little bit more love. This is a newer purchase of mine from this year, so holding on to it. So this is the Friendcation palette by Desi and Katie. I truly think I hold on to this just because I love them both so much that I want to support them. I unfortunately just do not use this palette, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not one of my palettes that I go to. I love them. That's why I wanted to buy it, to support them, but I think I'm just going to pass this along. I want to go through some of my Colourpop palettes. This here is the Colourpop Nude Mood palette. This is probably one that I use more than the other one. I actually think I'm going to hold on to this palette. So this is the Blush Crush palette. This came out with the Nude Mood, I believe. And I really just prefer the other one more so than this one. So this is going to get passed along. So this here is the Bare Necessities palette. Another palette that I do not plan to get rid of. I really adore this palette, and I use it quite often as well. Another one of their bigger palettes is the So Jaded. I love these jewel tone colors. They did such an amazing job at representing the theme with this palette, and I just really enjoy this palette. I use it quite often. Not getting rid of that either. So, this is the I Think I Love You palette. I liked it when I used it, but I just feel like I don't use it as much. I definitely think it's time to pass this along. This is the Double Entendre palette. I think that's how you say it. Again, a very pretty eyeshadow palette. I used this quite a bit before I got the Bare Necessities palette, but now that I have that palette, I don't really dive into this palette at all because these, again, are the same tones as the other palette. So another palette I'm going to pass along. So this is the Morphe and Jeffree Star palette. I really do enjoy this palette. I don't think it got as much hype as it should have. I loved the formula in this, and I still use it. So I'm going to hold on to this palette. Since we're on the subject of Morphe, I have the Morphe and Jaclyn Hill smaller palette. This is her like purple eyeshadow toned one. I'm going to go ahead and actually pass this along. I've only used this a handful of times. Well, I don't know. Actually, no. I think I'm going to hold on to this. I'm thinking I don't really need this palette, but then I look at it and I remember why I held on to it, because I do love the looks I create with this. I think I'm going to hold on to it for a little bit longer because I think I'm going to declutter the other ones. So let's finish off with these two. This is the older packaging. This one is their JH palette. Do you guys remember when Jaclyn Hill did her very first collaboration? It's this palette right here. I really merely had this for collection purposes more than anything. And you can see that it's gotten a lot of love. I've used it, I've broken it. This eyeshadow mainly, I used it quite a bit. I've dipped into quite a few of these shades and really enjoyed this palette, but I think it's definitely time to declutter this palette. It's really old, and I'm sure that the formula just isn't as what it used to be, so this is going. And then the last one I have from their old Morphe packaging is the 35C palette, which I held on again for a really long time. You can tell it doesn't smell right, so it definitely needs to be decluttered. I've had this for way too long. It's definitely time to put this to bed. I have this Fenty eyeshadow palette that I also got in a subscription box. I don't see anything in here that makes me have to keep it. So I have the Persona Identity 2 palette. I actually got this in a giveaway from Ashley Lamora here on YouTube, and I have never tried anything from Persona Cosmetics, but the times that I did play with this palette, I really enjoyed it. I thought that the formula was amazing. So I'm going to actually hold on to this palette because I feel like I need to give it more of a fair shot and play with it more. So this is something I'm going to hold on to. I have these two eyeshadow palettes from Ofra Cosmetics. I think, though, if we're being honest, I want to keep one and pass along the other because I definitely don't need two, and I have a lot already in my collection that's very similar to this. I'm going to pass this one along, and I think I'm going to hold on to this one. So I'm going to hold on to these. I don't plan to get rid of them. These two are the Mauve Obsessions and Emerald Obsessions. I believe I have another one maybe in the next drawer. And then I have this one, which is their Gold Palette Remastered. I've been told that the remastered palette is so much better and just a really great palette to try. So I'm going to try this again. And then the other one that you can see is kind of messy, but I do use it quite a bit. And again, I really do like the tones in here. So I really love these bigger palettes. I think that she did a really great job with these, and I love the color tones that she comes out with. This is the Violet Voss Essentials palette. I don't think I really dive into this. These are pretty colors, but again, I just don't dive into this palette at all. I kind of even forgot I had this palette, sad to say. I think I'm going to pass this along. This is my Anastasia Sultry palette in here. My entire collection is in the next drawer, but this is definitely going to stay in my collection. I have another one, again, I think another staple in my palette. You guys remember this palette was like the shit. This is my second one that I've purchased now, and I don't plan to get rid of it. One I actually think I might pass along is the Norvina palette. I think my daughter's played with it quite a bit, but it definitely just needs to go. I just don't use it. This is the e.l.f. Modern Metals collection. They came out with this a long time ago. I like this palette, but I just don't dive into it enough to justify it to keep it in my collection. It needs to go. I believe these are two of like the 5 or 4 palettes I have from Dose Colors. These are my favorite palettes right now. I've been using them a lot. They are actually part of my monthly palette collection right now. I do not plan to get rid of these. And then this one here is the Baked Browns palette. Do not plan to get rid of this. So next drawer I have is a lot of the Urban Decay. I have a lot of Anastasia in here, Too Faced, and I believe I have some random Tarte in there as well. So let's go ahead and just start off with this side of the collection, which is more my Too Faced collection. This one here is so I have the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette right here. This is a very beautiful palette. I actually do use this palette quite a bit. I couldn't put it down and I couldn't resist it. So I'm going to hold on to this palette because this is one of my favorite palettes to play around with for especially the metallics. This was the other Huda Beauty palette that I had talked about. This is the Ruby Obsessions palette. I said I was going to hold on to this palette, but to be honest, I just don't think I dive into this palette as much, and I think I might pass this along. Yeah, I think I should. I have this palette from Too Faced. This is the Palm Springs palette. This is actually one that I got in a subscription box, and I really enjoy this palette. I thought that the color selection is really good in here. I love the packaging. I think I'm actually going to hold on to this palette. So this is the Too Faced Pretty Mess palette with Erica Jane. I do know that you can find this now. I've seen this at TJ Maxx now. It's very hard to see because I do feel like the eyeshadow palette is a complete mess, and I really don't like the layout of it. I have these color stories already, and I don't dive into it as much as I should. I think I'm going to pass this along. But I do think it's a good palette. Oh, I don't know. I think I'm going to pass this along though because I do have a lot of these colors already. I have the Too Faced Natural Matte palette, and I do like this palette. Again, just one of those palettes that gets pushed to the back, so I don't really get to play with it. I am a huge fan of all matte palettes. I think I'm going to hold on to this palette so I can play with it a little bit more and really kind of, you know, get some use out of it. I have the Pretty Rich palette by Too Faced as well. Oh, I love this packaging. This is by far the prettiest thing that I think Too Faced has ever made. This is my least favorite color in the palette. I think it has the least potential of all the other shadows, but it's a very hard palette to get rid of, and I still do use it, so I just can't get rid of this palette. I just love it too much. A couple more palettes from Colourpop that I didn't get through. This is It's My Pleasure palette by Colourpop. I do not plan to get rid of this. I do use this quite often when I want to create more purplish style looks. And I do get quite a fair use out of it, so I'm holding on to this one. This is my favorite palette that Colourpop ever came out with. It is the X's and O's palette. Now I know that this is not anything that's crazy special in it, and the colors are very similar to the other colors that I have in my other palettes, but there is something about the richness of this palette that just creates the most beautiful, very rich copper tone shadows. And I just love it for this palette. It has created one of my favorite looks I've ever done, and I recreate that look all the time. I'll show you guys a picture if I can find it, but I just can't get rid of this palette. It's one of my favorites. Now this one here I've had in my collection, and I originally bought this actually to give this to my daughter. I just never really got around to giving it to her, so I'm finally going to pass this along to her. This is the Anastasia Prism palette. I know I'm going to keep a couple other of her eyeshadow palettes, so I can probably part ways with this, which I think I will. This here is the Soft Glam palette. I do not plan to get rid of this palette. Really love this palette. You can see it's very well loved. Again, just another palette that is in my collection as always. And I believe this might be the last one in my collection. So this is the Amrezy palette that she did. I think this was her very first palette that she ever created with Anastasia. I kept this more for memorabilia purposes. I do have in my other palettes from her brand, so I'm going to go ahead and officially declutter this palette. While it was good to me and I really loved this palette, it's definitely time that it gets tossed. It's been too long in my collection. So this is actually one that I found in the back. Again, this is why I need a declutter, you guys. This is the ABH Norvina collection. This is the only one that I ended up purchasing from her big pan sizes. And I just need to play with this more. I feel like there's so many great looks I can create with this palette, and I just haven't given it enough time. So I'm going to hold on to this palette, part of my Ulta haul. So this was part of my Ulta haul. I just picked these up. But this is the new Tartelette Little Toasted. I have the Little Juicy, and I have the In Bloom palette. I bought this in my recent Ulta haul, and I do not plan to get rid of these. I did not have this one, so I was excited about this one. This is the Little Juicy palette. I've played with it a few times now, and I really do like it. And then this was one that I decluttered a while ago, but it was because it was getting too old, and I really missed it, so I thought I would bring it back into my collection. So I am going to hold on to all three of these. And then this one here, I believe I got this in a BoxyCharm at one point. I do enjoy it. I think the formula is great in this, and I have no issues with this. And I love that it comes with a full-size mirror. And I love that it has the coordinating metallic shadows at the end to go with the eye look. I want to finish off my Dose of Colors collection. So a lot of this is newer to my collection. I do not plan to get rid of these also. I love, like I said in my as I said a while ago, I really do love these palettes. These smaller palettes just are some of my favorite palettes to play with. This one is the Blushing Berries palette. I also do have the Sassy Siennas and the Marvelous Mauves palette. And then this here is the Hidden Treasures palette. One that I want to hold on to because I feel like I really haven't played around with this palette at all. I haven't really given it a lot of playtime, and I really want to, so we're going to hold on to this. I have a few NARS palettes that I probably should declutter. The first one here is this NARS Inferno palette. It looks like this, very beautiful, but I just don't find myself really reaching for it, just because sometimes I feel like for a small palette, there's not enough mattes in here, and I just can't seem to grasp like a good color story to play around with this palette that I enjoy. So I think I'm going to pass this one along. So I do have these two that kind of correlate together. I have the Summer Lights and Summer Nights, I believe is what it's called. Yes, this one here is the Summer Lights palette. It does come with 2 bronzers, and then it comes with 4 shadows. I really love when NARS puts these large shadows in these palettes, but if I'm looking at all of these eyeshadow palettes, I believe this is my least used one, so I think I'm going to pass this one along. This is the one that I wanted to keep, which is their Hot Nights palette. I think the tones in here, yes, are just a little bit deeper, and I typically use this one when I want to reach for a NARS palette. So I'm going to hold on to this palette. And then I have the Skin Deep palette. This is one that I do not plan to get rid of because I do use this often. I will say that I feel like sometimes NARS doesn't get enough hype because I do find that they do come out with a lot of palettes, and because of that, we tend to kind of just brush over them. But of all the palettes that I have tried from NARS so far, this is hands down my favorite eyeshadow palette. I've talked about this in numerous tutorials, reviews, and stuff. I really do love when NARS puts these like larger matte shadows at the top, the very basic shadows, and then they kind of add a couple of pops of metallic in here. And these 2 right here are also mattes, but they're a little bit smaller, and I do not want to get rid of it. Then I have these little palettes. This is part of their newest collection that they came out with, the NARS Orgasm X palette collection. So this one here, you can see it's just so small. It's the one reason why I don't like this palette. It's just too small for me to ever reach into, and it's not really the tones that I prefer to go for, so I'm gonna declutter this. And I believe I might be decluttering these 2 as well. Again, very pretty colors, but when I play around with this palette, this is the only one I touch, and it just doesn't speak to me. And then I have this one, which is a little bit lighter, and I do like this one. I think it has a lot of beautiful summer tones. But again, I have these colors in other eyeshadow palettes, and if we're being honest with ourselves, I don't use this, or I don't reach for this. So this is one I also will be decluttering. So now we're going to move into Urban Decay. I have quite a few limited edition palettes, and then I have like their standard naked palettes. I really enjoyed her highlighters, and I don't really care for the layout of this. I held on to it because I really liked some of the shades, but in my last declutter, I thought I was going to get more use out of it, and since then I just haven't played with it, so it's definitely time to go. Another one that I've had for way too long in my collection, but it was the Urban Decay and Gwen Stefani palette. I really held on to this more so for collector purposes, but now I just kind of want to declutter it because I tried using it a while ago and the colors just weren't there, and it just doesn't do anything for me anymore. So I think the only reason why I kept it was for this blue shade. I don't remember what this one is called. Another one that I've had in my collection for too long, but do you guys remember these? They used to come out with these like every year. I think these are like their Vice palette. I do not use it, and I've had it in my collection for too long. It definitely needs to be decluttered. A collection I do want to hold on to, which I'm very excited to have been able to get. This is the Game of Thrones eyeshadow palette. This is one that I do not plan to get rid of. I really do actually like the eyeshadows that are in here. And even though the packaging for the most part is very bulky, and normally that doesn't bother me, but in this instance it is quite a bit bulky. I really love Game of Thrones, so that's another reason why I want to not get rid of it, but I actually can tell you guys that I really do like the shadows in here, and I actually think they perform pretty well. So now we have these little babies. So now let's move into these little babies. First one I have is the Naked Heat Petite Heat palette. And this is one that I do plan to part ways with. Very cute palette, but I just never dive into it. I think it's been touched maybe 2 or 3 times. Maybe this is the one I play with the most, but I did get rid of the other one in my last collection, and I thought I'd hold on to this one, but just don't use it, don't play with it, so decluttered it is. Next up I have is this one here. This is the Back Talk palette. I really loved the layout of this. I felt like there was like mixed reviews on this, but I thought that it was just a really great concept. While I don't use the blush, I don't use the eyeshadow palette portion of it, I'm going to pull it and move it over to my blush collection because I forgot that there was blushes in this, and I'm hoping that maybe I'll use it a little bit more. So I'm going to hold on to this for a little bit longer. We have the Naked Cherry palette. I am going to hold on to this one. This is one of my most used eyeshadow palettes from the Urban Decay Naked line. The Naked Reloaded eyeshadow palette, not really my favorite. The original Naked palette was amazing, but in my last declutter, I did get rid of that palette because I had this one, and now I just never reach for it. Maybe I think I'm just over it. I have the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette. I am planning to keep this one. I really do like this one, even though the colors are very light for me, and they don't really have a whole lot of depth. I still find myself able to create some really pretty yellow tone eyeshadow looks, and it still look wearable, and it still look, you know, pleasant, and you can wear it for work and stuff. So I really like this palette, so I plan to hold on to this one, but I do plan to declutter the Urban Decay Ultra Violet. I was very disappointed. I did do a review, and I really loved the way that the looks came out with this eyeshadow palette, but I was just sadly disappointed that there was a lack of purple eyeshadows in this palette. I really would have wished that they would have just done like an entire purple toned palette like they did with the Naked Honey. These colors here I already have in some of the other palettes, and I prefer other purple tones, and I really don't dive into the deeper ones. So this is one that I'm going to declutter. Whoa, that was intense. So this is kind of a mush of eyeshadow palettes. There's really no rhyme and reason. I feel like as I started to trickle down in my collection, stuff just started getting thrown in here. This section really, it like bothers me because there's no organization. Whew, I'm excited to get through this. I do have the Pure Cosmetics and Raw Beauty Christie palette. I still haven't picked up our Colourpop collection, just haven't played enough with it, so I definitely want to hold on to it. I have the Dominique Cosmetics Celestial Thunder palette, which looks like this. I really love her palettes. I think she has a really great formula, so I really want to hold on to them. So this is the first one. The second one I have is her Latte palette, which I believe is her original palette. This is my favorite palette. I think it's got really great colors in here. Then I have her Latte 2 palette. This one is a little bit lighter. I do like these more outer tone shades. I think they're really pretty. I have this last one, which has got like that sweater vibe going on to it. I'm actually thinking that I might declutter this one and hold on to her other palettes, because I feel like I don't dive into this one as much. So I think I need to declutter this one. All right, so I actually think it's time to declutter this. So this is the Tartelette palette. This is my favorite palette from Tarte, but I think it's time that I have to declutter this. The palette I tried using it the other day and just doesn't perform like it used to, so I think I'm gonna have to get a new one, but I think it's time to say goodbye. I'm really sad about it, but oh man, I really hate having to declutter it, but I know that like it just isn't performing very well anymore. So this is the Alamar Cosmetics eyeshadow palette. This is volume number 1. I'm still gonna keep this palette. I really love her eyeshadow formula. It's so buttery, super creamy, and the colors they're magnificent. I still want to hold on to it because I do dive into it, especially for these like richer blues. I really love these two. This one, which is the Makeup Geek in the Nude palette. This is one I'm going to declutter. I just don't really get much use out of it. This is the BoxyCharm Hello Charmer eyeshadow palette. I'm gonna declutter this one. This is by Lunar Beauty. This is the Life's a Drag palette. I do plan to keep it. I love the combination of colors in here as well. I love that he did the more neutral colors on this side and then kept the colorful colors on this side. And it's a very nice palette. I do enjoy it, so I want to hold on to it. I do have these two palettes by Makeup Obsession. This is the Rady and Makeup Obsession collab. This is the Dream palette. I'm going to plan to declutter this because I already have the other eyeshadow palettes that are very colorful, so I don't need that. And then this one here is the Rady Dusk palette. I actually think I'm going to hold on to this. I really loved this collaboration. I thought that this collection was really good, and I like the more deeper, cooler tones in here, so I do want to hold on to it because I do feel like I don't have as many cool tones as I thought I did in my palettes. I do have this eyeshadow palette from Lancome. Was gonna hold on to it and use it, but I never really did get around to playing with it, and I know my mom keeps eyeing it every time she comes over, so I think I'm gonna finally just pass it along to her. I don't know why I waited so long to do that, but yeah. Next up I have is by Beauty Bakery. This is the Game of Cones palette. This is the Fury of the Oven is what it says. Here is what the eyeshadow palette looks like. I just don't see a really good color story that I would enjoy wearing on myself. This is definitely one of those palettes, in my opinion, that needs to have a companion in order to make it work. So I think I'm going to declutter this. This here is the Ciate London palette. I believe this is the editor palette that we just got in our BoxyCharm. I have not played with this palette. I did do some swatching with it. But I never got to play with this palette aside from just swatching it, so I want to hold on to it and play with it a little bit. I know a few of you guys told me that you guys have gotten this in the past, but do enjoy it, so I definitely want to give it a shot. Next up is the Revealed Rouge Eyeshadow Palette by Coastal Scents. Very pretty colors, although have these colors already in my collection. I prefer the other palettes a little bit more than this palette, so I'm going to be decluttered. So I have a couple of the Alter Ego palettes. This is the Sahara palette. This is one that I want to hold on to. I really like the color story in this palette, so I'm going to hold on to this. I really do love Alter Ego palettes. If you guys haven't tried them, they do make dupes for more expensive eyeshadow palettes, but the formula is very good, and if you guys have seen comparisons, sometimes you cannot tell a difference between these eyeshadow palettes and the ones that they dupe, so this is one I definitely want to hold on to. Then I have the Aurora palette. I want to hold on to this one because I really do love these more summery tones in here. And then, of course, I want to hold on to the Goddess palette. I swear I'm trying to declutter, you guys, but this Goddess palette is absolutely stunning. I used this so much over the summer last year. Not so much this year, but because of quarantine, I feel like I really didn't play around with a bunch of eyeshadow palettes this year. Although, again, very great palette. I do not plan to get rid of this one. One I am going to declutter just because I don't really use it a whole lot is the Daydream palette. Now this one I believe is supposed to be a dupe for one of the Huda Beauty palettes, and of all of the palettes that I have from Alter Ego, this is my least used palette, so I'm going to go ahead and pass this along. I know tons of people that would probably really enjoy these color tones. Next up I have is the Zoeva Cocoa Blend palette. This was actually a palette that I was looking at my collection the other day, and I forgot I even had this palette. I definitely need to pull this out. I need to play with this, and I need to figure out what I feel about it. This one came in our BoxyCharm, and I had such high hopes for this palette. Unfortunately, it really did let me down. I thought that the colors in here were absolutely gorgeous. The actual performance of these palettes were just terrible, and I'm super disappointed in this eyeshadow palette. So yes, I'm gonna declutter this. I'm gonna go ahead and declutter this. I just don't dive into it. Again, the same issue with the other eyeshadow palette that I had from the Balm. The pan sizes in here just for me are way too small to ever get my shadow into, and I just don't ever reach for it. I'm finally going to declutter the Shade and Light eyeshadow palette. I contemplated on holding on to this for a while, but I have had this for way too long. Now that I have the Skin Deep palette from NARS, I use that way more than I ever touched this palette, so this does need to be decluttered. I have had it in my collection for a long time, and I don't reach for it. Next up I have is the Jouer Essential Matte and Shimmer palette. I did keep this palette for a while because I really enjoyed the colors in this eyeshadow palette, but unfortunately, I just don't see the need to keep it anymore when I have so many other brown palettes that I prefer. So that's going. All right, we have the Ace Beaute Grandoise. Yeah, we have this Ace Beaute palette. Here is what the colors look like. Very beautiful, rich tones. But because I do have a couple other palettes that have similar tones to this eyeshadow palette, I'm going to declutter this. Another one from Ace Beaute is the Scarlet Dusk palette. Again, very much similar to the other palettes that I have from Alter Ego. I'm going to declutter this. Another palette I'm going to pass along and declutter is the Millet Pepper palette. Very pretty palette. Just don't really dive into it. Again, as you can see, similar tones. I might hold on to this palette. This is my only Sigma eyeshadow palette, and I really, you know what, I'm going to declutter it. I haven't touched it this year. I know I haven't, so I obviously don't care for it enough. It's got to go. This here is the MAC and Selena eyeshadow palette collection. I'm going to go ahead and hold on to this. I'm a huge Selena fan. I know so many of us are, but not only that, I actually think they did a really great job with this collection this time. A lot of the products in this collection were top notch, and I'm so proud of the collection that they threw out. Really do actually enjoy this palette also, so this is staying. Then we have the Take Me to Brazil eyeshadow palette. This is one that I've had for a while now, and it's finally time to get rid of this palette. It just, again, it just isn't performing like it used to, and I've had it in my collection for too long. So you can see I just do not play with this as much, so there's no reason to hold on to it. We have the Ipsy and Tetris palette. Looks like this. It has only 6 eyeshadows in it. I didn't really understand the didn't really understand the color story behind this. I thought that there could have been a lot other better color choices to go into this palette. I'm actually going to give my mom this palette because of this blue. She is obsessed with like dark blues. There's like this specific blue that she loved from Lancome. They do not make them anymore. I've asked, I've looked around everywhere, but yeah, it's not going to be in part of my collection anymore. 2 of the LORAC Pro Mega Pro palettes. I do plan to hold on to this one. I really do like this. I actually pulled this into a monthly makeup basket, and it still performed really nicely. It had a lot of really great tones. I just feel like because this is pushed back into my collection again, I don't really play with it as much, but LORAC is a really great brand and has really great shadows. And this is what this palette looks like. And again, I actually think I'm going to declutter this palette because I feel like this palette doesn't perform as well as the LORAC Mega 3 palette. So this here is my last row in my drawer section. These are palettes that just didn't have room to go anywhere else. And you can see I kind of have like some of my nail stuff over here. So this is the Colored Rain eyeshadow palette. We got this in our Ipsy bag. It's just gotten mixed in the shuffle, but I kind of want to hold on to it because it has some nice like neutral colors in it. And this is the only thing I actually have from Colored Rain. So I'm going to hold on to this. Then I have the Touch in Soul Fill Up Orange. I'm going to declutter this. I got this in a BoxyCharm again, and I played with it off camera once or twice, and I just was not impressed. I have another eyeshadow palette from Millet Pepper. This one has like a little thing you pull down. It's got a little eyeshadow thing. It was fine. Not my favorite eyeshadow palette. We're going to pass that along and declutter. This here is by HUDABEAUTY. This is the Gay Bestie palette. I really... Isn't that cute? Isn't that such a cute palette? It's a talking palette, but I really do like this eyeshadow palette. It has really great tones in it. Super proud of him, so that's staying. Next up I have is the Shayna B Miami palette. I'm going to go ahead and just declutter this. It was an okay palette. Had some really nice matte colors in it, but I do have a lot of these colors already in other eyeshadow palettes. So I have this eyeshadow palette from Oma Beauty. I have not played with it. You guys can see it is brand new. I still need to play around with it a little bit more, so I'm going to hold on to it. Another eyeshadow palette from Alamar Cosmetics. This is what it looks like. I actually am going to declutter this. I do not care for this palette as much as I like her other palette that I am keeping. So I just wasn't super sold on it, so I'm going to pass that along. This is the Pure Festival Palette 2.0. I remember when I played with this originally, I thought it was a really good palette, and I thought the color story in here, I really liked the look that I created the first time I played with this palette, but then when I played with it a few times after, I noticed that the colors were getting a little splotchy on my eyes. I wasn't really sure what was going on there, so I just kind of stopped playing with this palette, and I really haven't missed it, so I'm going to go ahead and declutter it. Alright, next up we have is the Morphe and Manny MUA palette. This is the Glam palette. I really don't have a whole lot to say about it. It was fine. I'm just going to go ahead and declutter it. It's the Profusions Festival palette. I have played with this a few times, but as you can see, I just really prefer some of the other palettes that I have that have similar tones like this. This kind of reminds me a little bit of the Wet n Wild one that I'm saving. So because it's very similar to me in that aspect, I'm going to go ahead and declutter this. So then we have the Pineapple palette from Tarte. This was one of their Christmas collections. I'm still holding on to this because I still really like this palette. I love the palette itself, but I also don't mind the eyeshadows. This is one of the fewer times that I would say that their holiday collection palettes were that bad. And I just like the layout of this. So this is still staying in my collection. We have this little palette from Wander Beauty. It's called the Wander Rush palette. I'm going to pass this along. I just do not use it. Then I have these two palettes from Tarte. These are their Tarte clay palettes. So I have the Clay 1, which looks like this. And then I have Clay 2, which looks like that. The only reason why I haven't touched these palettes is because I truly just am overwhelmed with the eyeshadow palettes. So I'm going to hold on to both of these because I really do want to play with these. I've heard nothing but great reviews on these palettes and they have so much potential. I just need to spend more time playing with them. Next up, I have another palette that I am planning to keep is my Tati Beauty palette. That is definitely not going anywhere. I do use that often. I have this eyeshadow palette from Private Society. This is the Private Society Smoke palette. I have not played with this palette. I recently just actually got this in PR. I just haven't had time to play with it, so I'm still going to hold on to this. The Kat Von D, this is their Saint and Sinister palette. I've had this for too long. I actually held on to this as part of like a collector's palette, but I finally think it's time to just declutter it. You can see I've never really used it, and I think it's just time that I actually declutter this. I've had this for way too long. I wouldn't even feel safe even selling it because it's been out for so long and I'm just scared of it just being a bad palette. So we're going to go ahead and just declutter this. Two palettes. The last two palettes I have are by the Storybook Cosmetics palettes. I have the Fairy Tale one, the Robin Hood, which looks like this. And then I have this one here, which is, I believe, Little Red Riding Hood, which looks like that. I still want to hold on to these because I really thought that they were really great eyeshadow palettes and I loved the whole storybook theme on them. I thought they were really cute. Again, they just got stuck back in that corner and I forgot about them, so I'm hoping now I'll be able to play around with them a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and put all of these eyeshadows back. I'm going to organize them a little bit more and I'll show you guys the aftermath of what it looks like now and then what I'm decluttering. So because I decluttered enough eyeshadow palettes, I was able to transfer my eyeshadow palettes from the big 5 drawer down to just 3 drawers. So we're going to try something a little bit different. Normally I like to do mine by brands, but this time we're going to try something different and see if it flows a little bit better. So I put my smaller eyeshadow palettes in this section right here. These are some of my medium-sized palettes. You can see I've got them all backed in here, which I thought was great. And then lastly, we have some of the bigger palettes, some of the really big palettes, and then mixed in with some of the medium-sized palettes that I couldn't fit up in the medium drawer. So that there is everything that I'm decluttering right here, you guys. This is everything in my declutter. If you guys enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up. I will be passing some of this stuff along, putting some of it on my Poshmark, which will be linked in the description box. And then some of them will just have to simply get tossed. If any of you guys would like to look at it, I will have my Poshmark linked down below in the description box. That's everything. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys later. Bye.